The Kirthar National Park. This stretch of parkland in the Sindh province has become one of the most heated issues to emerge in Pakistan's environmental sector.
Sticking to their traditional
There is no air-monsoon data.
Vegetation removal in the park.
For 5 years, the controversy persists.
The operation will significantly impact plant communities negatively.
In 1974, an area of more than 4,000 square kilometers in southeast Sindh was declared an area of special conservation interest. This area was demarcated to create the Kirthar National Park, Edi Sumbak Game Reserve, and Mahal Kohistan Wildlife Sanctuary. These areas were given legal protection under the Sindh Wildlife Protection Ordinance of 1972. Still and seemingly lifeless under the hot desert sun, Kirthar is one of the most ecologically richest areas of Pakistan. In June 1997, the federal government issued an exploration license to Premier Kirthar, an oil and gas company operating in Pakistan. This allowed the company to carry out exploration activities on the condition of an approved Environment Impact Assessment, or EIA, that was developed specifically for this project and subsequently approved by the regulatory authorities. An area of 7,000 square kilometers referred to as the Dunbar Block was earmarked, which included areas of the Kirthar National Park. This raised important environmental concerns on the effects of such activity on a national park. But Pakistan needs to find new reserves of independently produced energy in order to meet increasing demand and to stave off the increasing price of oil and oil-based products.
Gas has now captured about 34%, 35% of the market since gas was discovered in Sui. And gas is an indigenous source of energy. It replaces fuel oil, which is imported. A lot of foreign exchange is saved for the country, which can be used for other purposes.
Gas has a number of benefits, even getting away from the price issue, which I think is important for Pakistan. One, it is environmentally much more friendly to use. Gas is much more efficient to use. When you burn gas, you tend to use less of it, particularly even when you're burning gas on your cooker, but also for power generation and other things. So it does help from the sustainability perspective.
Yes, there is no doubt that Pakistan does need gas. The issue is that how do you explore and where do you explore? If the gas is available in a particular national park, then there's a problem, but the problem can be overcome. There are techniques, I believe these days, which if followed carefully can ensure that the damage is minimum or not at all.
There's this big worry out there that the oil industry is a big bad thing, that's a polluter and a destroyer of the environment, and that's really not true. It certainly doesn't have to be true, and we're very committed to preservation of the environment. Well, I believe that we can engage in sustainable development of the gas resources of the national park, and by that I mean making sure that the wildlife is not threatened, at the same time looking after and in some small way enhancing the lives of the people that live in the area. It's not an easy job because there are often conflicts between human demands and those of the natural environment, and of course we're caught between the two.
Kirthar remains caught fast in a tussle between two opposing camps. From the beginning, the NGOs questioned the assessment at this stage of the long-term impact on Kirthar's fragile ecology and maintained that the Federal Environment Protection Act of 1997 contained provisions for oil and gas exploration in sensitive areas, whereas the Sindh Wildlife Protection Ordinance of 1972 did not permit this. In 2001, the provincial law was amended.
A decision has been made, the provincial law has been changed. WWF finds that it is unfortunate that such a drastic measure had to be taken. Because of the change in law, oil and gas exploration can take place in any protected area in Sindh. So we feel that it is very unfortunate that such a decision was taken because it's not a balanced decision.
I don't think laws are divine or they're made by God. We have to keep step with the times and our requirements. Our requirements initially, first of all, as human beings. Okay, animals and plants and all these things are important. But I think it is the prime task of the government to take care of the citizens.
But the conservationists did not agree. In fact, many believed the state had neither acted in the best interest of the public nor consulted all those involved.
Even if the stakeholders like Environment Department and Wildlife Department was not consulted initially, but subsequently every department played its role, stakeholders played their role, and the whole scenario has been changed from the initial state to the present scenario, that the proponents, they are now going accordingly the environmental laws and the Wildlife Protection Act ordinance.
Lack of any information and research on the Kirthar Park meant that an environmental baseline study needed to be undertaken to complement a sound EIA process.
It's a very interesting thing that this park was established 25 to 30 years ago, but there was no baseline information available before this project actually started.
The University of Melbourne was engaged to undertake what was one of the most comprehensive short-term surveys of a national park. On completion, the baseline study was presented to the public. This study was lauded by all stakeholders, including the NGOs. With the baseline study as a foundation, PKP was able to develop a robust EIA of international standard.
Now, environmental impact assessment is a fundamental component in the environmental assessment process, which is carried out by nations, by institutions, to decide whether a particular activity in an area can be done or cannot be done. Whether the nation or the regulatory body is willing to accept that level of impact with the mitigation measures or not.
Oil and gas industry has operated successfully in an environmental sense and in a socio-economic sense, right the way up from, let's say, the Arctic Circle in Alaska, all the way through to the work Chevron have done in Western Australia, to I know BP's work in Papua New Guinea rainforests. So this is by no means unique.
As part of the standard regulatory process for EIAs in Pakistan, the EIA report was presented at a 3-day public hearing to an audience of wildlife experts, NGOs, media, and the general public for scrutiny. PKP and the consultants engaged to produce the EIA had to defend the document to the satisfaction of the presiding review committee.
There are 70,000 people and 114 villages in a national park. There is only one source of clean drinking water. There are no roads, hardly any schools, hardly any female literacy, and in most villages, only one family out of maybe 30 families has 3 meals a day.
Thus a total of 64,000 kilograms of explosive will be used.
All of those explosives, as we have heard, they are spread out linearly and over the area as well, and over time.
Loaded with 4 to 6 kilograms.
Satisfied that the PKP's EIA contained effective mitigation measures to minimize the effects of the company's proposed operation, the Sindh EPA granted approval for PKP to begin its seismic operations in the Kirthar National Park. 500 kilometers of seismic lines were to be acquired in the protected areas.
We're using small amounts of explosives, which are buried into the ground. Each hole is drilled to 1.7 meters, and small amounts of charge are loaded into the holes, and the holes are backfilled with sand. We are using a 9-hole pattern, shot pattern, spread over 25 meters. When we detonate these 9 holes, they're detonated simultaneously, and there's very little impact on the area.
I had been to the site. I have myself seen the actual blasting. It is a small jerk, but it doesn't create that impression of what we had in mind, that will be a heavy blasting and a disturbance.
There's no evidence of damage to the surface. The energy that we want goes down into the ground and does not come up onto the surface.
At PKP's seismic base camp, operations had to be handled with great care. The challenge lay in exploring the area for gas and conducting the required seismic survey without causing irreparable damage to the park's wildlife or habitats. The base camp, housing almost 700 workers and professionals, was carefully pieced together. A series of carefully planned and well-implemented mitigation measures were put in place, like watering the roads to reduce dust emissions and subsequently monitoring the effects of this measure through the use of air monitoring instruments or dust traps. In handling the solid and liquid waste generated during the operations, PKP stringently followed the requirements put down by the EIA.
Combustible waste is incinerated in a specially designed area outside of the Kirthar National Park. Other waste, such as oil and other non-combustibles, are sold on and recycled through proper approved channels.
Although a minimal network of existing access roads were used, vehicular traffic was restricted to certain areas. Local camels were used to transport equipment and materials across the desert to avoid creating new tracks or adding to noise pollution. They were also muzzled to prevent them from grazing within sensitive areas. Apart from the concerns relating to the physical environment, a greater issue for the NGOs was the impact operations would have on the wildlife that inhabited the area.
So this is the behavior of the animals, that they shift from one place to another place according to their requirement in the seasons. So there was no alarm.
There was a belief that animals were likely to feel threatened and would move out of their home ranges should their feeding areas or watering holes be disturbed.
जी उन्होंने जो पैटर्न सेट किया था वो इस तरीके का था कि जी सुबह जब ग्रेजिंग का टाइम होता है तो उस टाइम पे 2 घंटे ये सूरज निकलने के बाद उस एरिया में दाखिल होंगे, और शाम जब फिर एनिमल्स की ग्रेजिंग का टाइम होता है तो सूरज गुरूब होने से पहले एरिया से 2 घंटे पहले जो है लोग निकल आएंगे.
Under the conditions of the EIA, these mitigation measures were monitored by the Sindh Wildlife Department, the Sindh EPA, and an independent monitoring team, or IMC. The IMC followed every on-site activity, making sure that PKP's operations complied with environmental and safety regulations.
उधर मुझे आग जलती भी नजर आई है, जो कि आप लोगों को मना किया कि आप लोग सिलेंडर के ऊपर चाय बनाएंगे, आप आग नहीं जलाएंगे. क्यों आपने किया कि इसकी निशानी ये है कि ये वहाँ से केसिंग भी मिली है. ठीक है ना प्राचा साहब, ये केसिंग वहाँ से मिली है, ये केसिंग उठाना बैक क्यों किया?
सर हमारी जिम्मेदारी बहुत बढ़ जाती है जब ये लोग फील्ड में काम के लिए निकलते हैं. तो सबसे पहले तो हमारा मॉनिटर, आईएमसी का मॉनिटर आगे होता है. हमारे लोग जो है इनके क्रू से आगे होते हैं. वहाँ पे अगर कोई एनिमल या कोई भी चीज़ इस हवाले से वाइल्ड लाइफ के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, एनवायरनमेंट के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से देखी जाती है तो इनका सारा ऑपरेशन रोक दिया जाता है जब तक कि वो चीज़ अपनी मर्ज़ी से उस जगह से आगे पीछे ना हो जाए. तब तक इनके किसी बंदे को आगे जाने की इजाज़त नहीं होती. वो मुकम्मल तौर पे अथॉरिटी होती है उस मॉनिटर की कि उन चीज़ को रोके और फिर उन्हें आगे जाने की इजाज़त दे.
On the completion of the activities, a green team was employed to check if all cleanup activities had been completed and to remove any remaining trash. Following the conclusion of camp activities, the restoration teams left the area the closest possible to its original condition.
We are not new to working in environmentally sensitive areas. 2 years ago, I managed a project in Hammerlig Hill, which is directly to the west of the Dunbar area where we're working now, also in the Dunbar block. We drilled a well on the crest of that hill in the middle of an area where Uriel sheep live and breed, and we had a marvellous morning. I did with the IUCN representatives and the local game wardens, spotting the Uriel who were walking on the ridges within sight and earshot of the rig. We'd put into place very major mitigation measures, and it was just wonderful to get out there and see that they had worked.
With the promise of valuable gas reserves, Kirthar has been thrust onto center stage. And for the first time, and sadly, only now have its people even been acknowledged.
The biological environment, the wildlife, we felt that was the highest risk area. But as the job went on, confidence developed, and we found that we could manage that with appropriate cautions. Most of the long-term issues are related to the communities. For example, employment. If employment is provided, is it provided in fair proportion to the local community?
The promise of employment with PKP, however temporary, has been an unexpected boon for many families.
बाकी जिन ज़मीन में अचे थी ड्रिल बिल अचे थी केबल वारो कमु अचे थो बिल्कुलु उनजा उठ लॻाइनि था उनखे तारीख़ ॾियनि था जिते कमु प्रेशर बीहनि था उनखे मज़दूर ॾियनि था राति जी 100-150 रुपया ॾियारी ॾियनि था छॾियो वञे सुबुह जो वरी अचे कमु ते हू बि जेके लेबर सां बि शुरू थिया त इन खां पोइ जेके बि वाइरियूं ॿारियूं विछाईंदा आहिनि उनजी बि मज़दूरी थींदी आहे के माण्हू तन ते बीठल आहिनि के उठां ते के त घर बैठे मज़दूरी खणनि ॿियो त फसल जिन में अचे तिन जो हिसाब किताब ॾियनि था सभु कुझु
You're talking about people living below the poverty level, most of them. People having been forced to move the minute the water level drops in the local wells. So I think what we're looking at is a very serious poverty alleviation package. We're not looking at credits. We're not looking at teaching people vocational training, because these things come after you've taken care of the basic needs. We're looking at food.
जो इधर है नहीं तभी हमारे वास्ते तो कुछ नहीं है हमारे को क्या पता है जो जमीन के अंदर में क्या है जो हो लेगा तो ऐसे बोलता है जो हो लेगा चार पढ़ेगा कोई डॉक्टर कोई आसानी कोई नौकरी हमारे को गरीब लोग को भी मिलेगा हम तो ऐसे बोलता है अल्लाह को मालूमत है क्या करेंगे ये लोग हम तो दिल में ऐसे बोलता है जो हमारे वास्ते आसानी होता है
The question remains, do we stand to lose a fragile piece of environment in the cause of national development? Or could it be that we are in danger of not seeing the wood for the trees? Yet having come so far in environmental technology, perhaps there is a chance that we need not lose one resource over the other entirely.
I'm sure if all the parties can meet together and discuss issues in a transparent manner, then there are so many options available for the future. Then some option can be developed which is acceptable to all parties. Obviously, in a negotiation, all parties have to move from their strict positions, but this movement can only take place if a platform for dialogue is made available, which at the moment, it's unfortunate, is not available.
If you just sort of sit back and say this is no good, let's close it down, that is one view. But on the other hand, the activists should play a role proactively. Things are happening over there. They should be able to access information. They should be able to liaise with the monitoring committee. They should, I think, be on the management of the park. If that happens, they would have much more of a insight into what's going on over there and be able to, I think, point out what problems are emerging during the implementation of the overall seismic surveys or the oil exploration work in the area.
It needs commitment, it needs resources, and it needs capacity of the regulatory bodies as well as the capacity from the NGOs and other environmental groups to monitor the activity and guide the commercial sector or steer the commercial sector into the right direction.
The amount of public scrutiny on this project and government scrutiny has really been quite intense and I think unprecedented in Pakistan, so far as I know. And I think that the level of interest and constructive debate on this in this country has been, you know, a great, I think it's been a success in itself for the institutions and the governance of the environment in Pakistan, and hopefully we've all learned from it. The one thing that I am convinced of, and we're convinced of as a company, is that we can develop gas without threatening the wildlife. We can do it in a clean and responsible way, and that we can help the Sindh government to preserve and enhance the park.